Chapter 1. The Awakening of Titan Station. Dr. Lyra Quinn floated in the gentle suspension of cryosleep, her mind locked in the deep, dreamless stasis that had held her for 50 years. The world outside her chamber was silent, the hum of machinery that had once been Titan Station's lifeblood now a distant memory. No one expected to wake up. Titan Station had been built as a last-ditch effort to monitor the farthest reaches of space, abandoned by most of humanity as they moved their efforts toward more habitable worlds within the solar system. But then something happened. With a soft hiss, the chamber hissed open. Lyra's eyelids fluttered, her body sluggish, fighting the sensation of cold creeping through her bones as the last traces of cryofluid evaporated from her skin. For a moment, disorientation hit her like a tidal wave. 50 years or more. How long had she been out? Where was she? Why had she been awakened? Her vision blurred, then cleared as the soft, sterile light of the station's control room came into focus. The long, sleek lines of the station's core were untouched by time, the panels still gleaming as though it had been just yesterday when she'd stepped inside the cryochamber. But something had changed. The hum of the machinery was now accompanied by a persistent beeping, a sound she hadn't heard in decades. As she struggled to sit up, a figure stepped into her line of sight. Dr. Quinn, the familiar voice of the station's AI, Valis, greeted her softly. "I apologize for the abrupt wake-up. There's been an anomaly." Lyra coughed, her voice raspy from years of disuse. "An anomaly? What kind of anomaly?" "The kind that doesn't make sense," Valis replied. The AI's voice was tinged with what could only be described as concern, a subtle humanization in the programming Lyra had spent years perfecting. "We've received a signal. From Andromeda." Lyra's mind snapped into full awareness. "Andromeda? That's impossible." "I know," Valis agreed. "But the signal is clear. It contains data far beyond our current understanding. You must see it for yourself." Lyra's feet touched the cold metal of the floor, her muscles still weak, but her mind racing. The long years of waiting, the endless silence of space, had led to this, something new, something that could change everything. As she made her way to the station's central command hub, the weight of what this meant began to settle on her shoulders. Andromeda, a galaxy over 2.5 million light-years away. How could a signal have reached them from such an incomprehensible distance? And what, or who, had sent it? At the command hub, Lyra's fingers flew over the holographic interface, bringing up the signal data. It was there, clear as day, an intricate sequence of star maps, advanced quantum equations, and a repeating message in a language that, while unfamiliar, held the faint echoes of something recognizable. But there was more. Beneath the message, embedded within the layers of data, was something else. Instructions. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as the reality of it hit her. The message was not just a greeting, it was a guide, a roadmap to technology that could allow humanity to travel beyond the stars, far beyond anything they had ever dreamed. "We need to assemble a team," Lyra muttered, her voice shaky with awe and disbelief. Valis's holographic form flickered into view beside her. "The Intergalactic Alliance has already been notified. They are sending specialists. You are to lead the mission, Dr. Quinn." Lyra nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment she had spent her entire career preparing for. The moment that could change the future of humanity. But it also meant leaving everything behind, embarking on a journey that could take them farther than anyone had ever gone. And there was no guarantee they would ever return. Chapter 2. The Quantum Drive. The next few days were a blur of activity. The Alliance moved swiftly, sending the best minds they had to Titan Station. Orion Black, a young but brilliant engineer known for his work on experimental propulsion systems, arrived first, his reputation preceding him. With his unruly hair and sharp wit, he immediately clashed with Lyra's meticulous nature, but they both knew they were on the same side. The stakes were too high for petty disagreements. Eva Run, a cyberneticist specializing in artificial intelligence integration, joined soon after. Her quiet demeanor masked an intense focus and razor-sharp intellect. Together, they worked tirelessly, analyzing the signal's contents, decrypting the star maps, and piecing together the impossible technology embedded within. And then there was Thrax, the alien diplomat. His arrival caused quite a stir among the human crew. Thrax belonged to the Juntar, an advanced race that had been part of the Intergalactic Alliance long before humanity had taken its first steps beyond the solar system. His presence was a reminder that they were not alone in the universe. and that the implications of this mission extended far beyond humanity's reach. Together, the team worked on building the Aurora, a sleek interstellar ship equipped with the new quantum drive, a technology that could theoretically fold space, allowing them to traverse the vast distance to Andromeda in mere weeks. The technology was untested, dangerous, but it was their only chance. "Are you sure this is going to work?" Orion asked, his voice laced with skepticism as he and Lyra stood in the ship's engine room, staring at the massive quantum core that would power their journey. "No," Lyra admitted, "but we don't have any other option." Thrax, standing in the shadows, spoke in his deep, rumbling voice. "The Gentar have theories about such technology, but it has always been deemed too dangerous to pursue. And yet here we are," Lyra replied, her gaze never leaving the core. "Dangerous or not, this is our only shot." Chapter 3. The Journey to Andromeda. The day of departure arrived, and as the Aurora's engines roared to life, Lyra felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The quantum drive hummed beneath their feet, a low, ominous sound that seemed to reverberate through the very fabric of space. "We're ready," Eva's voice crackled over the comms. "All systems green." "Then let's make history," Lyra replied. The stars outside the viewport blurred as the quantum drive activated, the familiar constellations of their home galaxy twisting and warping as space itself bent around them. The sensation was unlike anything Lyra had ever experienced, a moment of intense pressure, followed by a disorienting lightness as they slipped through the fabric of the universe. For weeks, they traveled through the void between galaxies, the crew growing more restless with each passing day. Time had little meaning in the endless expanse of space, and the isolation began to take its toll. Strange things began to happen. At first, it was small lights flickering, subtle shifts in gravity. But then, more disturbing phenomena appeared. Lyra began hearing whispers in the darkness, voices speaking in languages she couldn't understand. Orion reported seeing shadows moving just out of sight, shapes that couldn't possibly be there. "Is it the quantum drive?" Eva wondered aloud one evening as they gathered in the ship's common area. "Or is something else happening to us?" "It could be the strain of the journey," Thrax said, his alien eyes reflecting the dim light. "But I fear it may be more than that." Chapter 4. The First Contact. When they finally arrived in Andromeda, the crew's relief was palpable. The unfamiliar stars of a new galaxy stretched out before them, breathtaking in their alien beauty. But as they approached the source of the signal, their awe quickly turned to dread. The planet they found was nothing like they had expected. It was barren, desolate, an ancient world long abandoned by its inhabitants. The signal had led them here, but whatever civilization had sent it was long gone. Only ruins remained, towering structures of a once great empire now crumbling into dust. As they explored the surface, they discovered something horrifying. Beneath the ruins, hidden deep within the planet's core, was a machine built to transcend space and time, to harness the very fabric of reality. But it had failed catastrophically. The machine had torn open a rift, a wound in the universe that had swallowed the civilization whole. And now it was expanding. "We need to leave," Thrax said, his voice filled with urgency. "This place is a graveyard. If we stay here, we will join them." But it was too late. The rift had already begun to affect them. Time itself warped around the crew, distorting their perceptions, pulling them into a vortex of overlapping realities. Lyra found herself reliving moments from her past, the echoes of her life flashing before her eyes. Orion and Eva were trapped in similar loops, their minds unraveling as the rift consumed them. Chapter 5. The Collapse. Desperation set in. The crew's only hope was to reverse the damage, to close the rift before it tore the entire galaxy apart. But the knowledge they needed was beyond them, hidden in the remnants of the lost civilization, encoded in the very signal that had led them here. As the rift expanded, Lyra made a choice. She would enter the machine, connect her mind to its vast network, and attempt to decipher the alien technology. It was a suicide mission, she knew that, but it was the only way. With trembling hands, she activated the machine, feeling its cold embrace as it connected to her consciousness. The alien language flooded her mind, overwhelming her senses. But slowly, piece by piece, she began to understand. The civilization had been trying to create a gateway, a bridge between galaxies, a way to connect their world to others. But they had miscalculated. The rift they had opened was not a gateway. It was a tear in the very fabric of the universe. Lyra worked quickly, her mind racing against time. She rewrote the equations, reprogrammed the machine, and with a final surge of energy, collapsed the rift. The universe shuddered. Chapter 6: The Return. When Lyra awoke, she was back on the Aurora. The crew was alive, but barely. The rift was gone, the danger averted, but at a cost. The journey home was long and silent, the weight of what they had seen, what they had done, pressing down on them. As they re-entered the familiar space of the Milky Way, Lyra couldn't help but wonder. The signal had been a warning, not an invitation. A warning of the dangers that lay beyond their understanding. But humanity would never stop searching. And neither would she. Chapter 7: Echoes of the Past. Lyra sat alone in the darkened command center of the Aurora, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound breaking the silence. She had not spoken to the crew for hours, maybe days, lost in her thoughts and the data she had recovered from the alien machine. The signal had been decoded, revealing more than she had hoped for. Encrypted star maps, mathematical formulas for controlling the rifts, and most disturbing of all, hidden messages embedded within the code. There was something or someone calling out to her across the vast expanse of space. The voices in her dreams had become more frequent, more insistent. Ancient beings from a civilization long lost to time, whose consciousness had somehow been entangled with the rift. They were not just memories. They were echoes, the last thoughts of a dying race that had tried and failed to manipulate the very fabric of space and time. The rift had not only torn apart their world, but had connected their consciousness to something far darker, something that now seemed to reach into Lyra's mind. She blinked, rubbing her eyes. The visions were blurring with the waking world, and her mind was starting to fray at the edges. Was it her imagination? Or was it the rift that had changed her? Lyra stood up abruptly, shaking off the thoughts. She couldn't afford to dwell on it. There was work to do. Her fingers flew across the console as she reviewed the star maps once again. One of the encrypted coordinates glowed faintly in the corner of her screen. A rift, far larger than the one in Andromeda, was destabilizing in the direction of the Perseus cluster, a region on the far side of the Milky Way. Lyra, a voice interrupted her. It was Orion, his face weary as he stood in the doorway. "We need to talk." "I know," she replied, not looking up from the screen. "I've been thinking about it too." Orion stepped closer, his gaze softening. "You've been obsessing over this. We need to make sure we're not chasing ghosts. Whatever this signal is, we don't fully understand it. The rift nearly killed us all, and now you're planning to go after another one." She exhaled sharply. "I don't have a choice. The answers are there. They're calling to me. And if we don't investigate this, if we don't stop whatever's happening, this galaxy could fall into the same chaos as the Andromedan civilization." Orion rubbed his temples. "We don't even know if those rifts are linked. You're pushing us toward the unknown, and I'm not sure we can survive another rift like the last one." "Survival is secondary," Lyra said, her voice firm now. "Knowledge is what matters. If we don't stop it now, it will keep spreading, and it won't just destroy this galaxy. It'll destroy everything. We have to take the risk." Orion stood in silence for a moment, considering. Then he sighed. "Fine, but we do this carefully with a plan. I'm not going to follow you blindly into the unknown again." Lyra nodded, appreciating his caution, but knowing that time was running out. Chapter 8: The Dark Path Forward. The decision was made. The crew had gathered in the common area, a tense atmosphere hanging over them. Eva, ever the scientist, was quiet as usual, but there was an edge to her demeanor now, an unsettling unease that Lyra hadn't seen before. Thrax, on the other hand, remained unreadable, his alien eyes staring out into the vastness of space as if searching for something beyond the stars. "We're heading toward the Perseus cluster," Lyra announced, standing at the head of the table. "There's a rift there, a larger one, and we need to investigate it. We need to know if it's connected to what happened in Andromeda." Eva raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly are we going to survive it if it's bigger? Do we even have the technology to close something like that?" Lyra glanced over at Orion, who stood behind her, arms crossed. "We don't know yet, but we have the knowledge from the Andromedan machine, and we have the quantum drive. We'll use the ship's energy to stabilize the rift temporarily, long enough to study it. And what if it's worse than the last ones?" Orion asked, his voice low. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She had no guarantees. None of them did. "Then we find a way to stop it. We'll figure it out as we go." The crew exchanged uncertain glances, but in the end, there was no other choice. The Aurora changed course, heading toward the Perseus cluster at full speed. the quantum drive humming softly beneath them as the stars stretched and warped in their wake. The journey took several weeks, and during that time, Lyra became more and more consumed by the signal. The dreams came every night, visions of the Andromedan world as it had been before the collapse. Towering cities, once teeming with life, now reduced to empty ruins, the rift in the sky overhead swallowing everything. Lyra could almost hear their voices, soft whispers full of despair. The crew had begun to show signs of strain. Eva had started talking to herself, muttering about strange patterns she thought she saw in the data. Orion was withdrawn, pacing the ship at odd hours. Thrax, usually composed and thoughtful, had become distant, often staring into space as if trying to decipher the mysteries of the universe. As the Aurora entered the Perseus cluster, Lyra could feel the tension rising. The rift's energy was palpable, almost like a low hum in the air. They were getting closer. "It's there," Lyra said, pointing at the image on the screen. "We're approaching the source." The rift appeared on the view screen, a massive tear in space, far larger than anything they had encountered before. It was a swirling mass of energy, its edges crackling with violent storms. The ship's sensors flickered as they came within range, the electromagnetic disturbance threatening to short out the systems. Thrax stepped forward, his voice solemn. "We should not be here. This rift is not like the others. It feels alive." Eva frowned. "What do you mean, alive?" "It is not just a tear in space," Thrax explained. "It is a consciousness. Something is feeding from it." Lyra's heart raced. The Andromedan civilization had fallen because of this, a consciousness feeding on the very fabric of space, an entity born from the rift itself. Was that what they were dealing with now? "We need to get closer," Lyra said, determination in her voice. "We need to understand what's causing this." As the Aurora slowly edged closer to the rift, the ship began to tremble. The quantum drive sputtered, flickering erratically as the energy from the rift began to interfere with the ship's systems. "Everything's going haywire," Orion shouted, his hands flying over the controls. "We need to stabilize the rift," Lyra ordered, but even as she spoke, she could feel it, the pull of the rift, like an invisible hand reaching out to them. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered, and the crew was thrown to the floor as the rift's energy enveloped them. Chapter 9. Into the Abyss. Lyra woke to the sound of alarms blaring. The ship was spinning, torn between the rift's gravitational pull and the chaotic fluctuations of the quantum drive. Her head throbbed, her body aching from the violent turbulence. She scrambled to her feet, rushing to the command console. "Status report," she shouted. Orion's voice was strained. "We've lost control. The rift's energy is too strong. I can't stabilize the ship." Eva was already at the auxiliary console, her fingers moving frantically. "The rift is pulling us in. I'm trying to divert power to the engines, but I don't know if it'll be enough." Thrax stepped forward, his alien eyes glowing faintly. "There is no escape unless we close the rift. We cannot fight it. It is too strong." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. "We can't just give up. There has to be a way to reverse it." Before anyone could respond, a new voice echoed in the ship's comms. It was not human. It was a voice, familiar yet alien, speaking in the same cryptic language that had haunted Lyra's dreams. "Do not fear," the voice said. "You are not alone." The crew froze, staring at each other in disbelief. The voice continued, growing louder, as if the rift itself was speaking to them. "You are the chosen ones. The key to restoring balance." The rift pulsed in response, a blinding light flooding the cockpit. Then, everything went black. Chapter 10. The Rebirth of the Cosmos. Lyra awoke in a strange place, her body weightless. She was no longer on the Aurora. She was floating in a vast, infinite void, surrounded by stars that seemed to shimmer with a new intensity. The rift was gone, and in its place stood something else, a gateway, a bridge between dimensions. "You are here," the voice said again, now clearer, more powerful. "You have entered the next phase of your journey." Lyra's mind raced as she tried to comprehend what was happening. She looked around, trying to make sense of the surreal environment. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, a realm beyond time, a space between spaces. "You are the ones who will shape the future," the voice continued. "You will be the ones to decide the fate of all that exists. Choose wisely, for the balance of the universe depends on it." And then, in that moment, everything fell into place. The rift had not been an accident. It had been a test for humanity, for Lyra, and for the crew of the Aurora. They were no longer mere explorers. They were the inheritors of something far greater, something that could change the universe forever. The choice was theirs. But the question remained, what would they do with the power they now held? The universe waited. Chapter 11, The Path of Choices. Lyra floated in the vast expanse of the interdimensional space, her mind racing with the implications of the voice's words. The universe, the very fabric of existence, was now within her grasp. She could feel its energy, its pulse, as though the stars themselves were alive, each one beating in time with her own heart. The gateway stood before her, an ethereal doorway suspended in the nothingness, glowing faintly with the colors of 1,000 galaxies. Behind her, the rift had vanished, and in its place was a quiet silence. The universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to make the next move. "You have entered the next phase of your journey," the voice repeated, its tone more urgent now. "But time is a fragile thing. You must choose." Lyra closed her eyes, trying to focus, trying to understand the weight of the choice before her. The voice had spoken of balance, of the fate of everything that existed. But what did that mean? What was she supposed to do with the power that had been thrust upon her? Suddenly, a new presence appeared beside her, a shadow that was not quite solid, but more like a shifting cloud of energy. It took shape, slowly revealing itself as a figure, tall and imposing, cloaked in the same glowing light that had surrounded the gateway. Its eyes, or what could be interpreted as eyes, shone with the intensity of distant stars. "You are the one who has crossed the threshold," the figure said, its voice low and resonant. "I am the guardian of the Nexus, the keeper of the paths. It is my duty to guide you." Lyra felt a cold chill run down her spine. "Guide me? Guide me where?" The figure's gaze seemed to pierce through her very soul. "You have entered the realm of infinite possibilities. There are many paths ahead, Lyra. Each choice you make will reshape reality, for good or ill." Lyra took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't understand. What am I supposed to do?" The Guardian extended its hand, and suddenly, a series of visions flooded Lyra's mind. Images of worlds she had never seen, of battles fought across galaxies, of civilizations rising and falling in the blink of an eye. She saw the Aurora and its crew, each of them standing at the crossroads of destiny. She saw the rift, the echoes of the Andromedan civilization, and the dark forces that were now stirring in the depths of the universe. "You are not alone in this journey," the Guardian said. "The forces of creation and destruction are in motion. The rift you closed was but the beginning. There are others who seek to manipulate the power of the Nexus for their own ends. It is your task to stop them." Lyra's mind reeled. "Others? Who are they?" The Guardian's voice grew colder. "They are the architects of destruction, ancient beings who once sought to control the rifts and shape the universe according to their will. They have been waiting for the right moment to return, and that moment is now." A surge of fear shot through Lyra. The architects, she had heard whispers of such beings in the ancient data she had uncovered from the Andromedan machine. They were said to be the creators of the rifts, the ones who had twisted the fabric of space and time, seeking to gain dominion over all worlds. Now they were returning. "How do I stop them?" Lyra asked, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her heart. The Guardian's eyes flashed. "You must use the power of the Nexus. But you cannot do so alone. You will need allies, those who will fight alongside you. The choices you make now will determine the future of the universe. Choose wisely." With a flick of its hand, the Guardian conjured a holographic map, showing Lyra the paths she could take. The map was a swirling array of light and energy, depicting different star systems, planets, and unknown regions of space. Some of the paths were bathed in light, others in darkness. "These are the paths of destiny," the Guardian said. "You must choose one." Lyra studied the map carefully, her eyes scanning the various routes. She saw familiar constellations, some she had encountered before, and others that were entirely unknown to her. One path led to a distant world at the edge of the galaxy, a place where the architects were said to have once built their first rift. Another path took her toward a forgotten sector of the Andromeda galaxy, where an ancient, hidden civilization might hold the key to stopping the architects' return. And yet another path led to the very heart of the Nexus, a place that could either offer unimaginable power or lead to total destruction. The weight of the decision pressed down on Lyra like a physical force. Each choice seemed fraught with danger, yet each one held the promise of potential salvation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lyra made her choice. "I will go to the forgotten sector of Andromeda," she said, her voice resolute. "I believe the answers we need are there." The Guardian nodded, its form dissolving into the light. "So be it. The path you have chosen will not be easy, but it is the only one that may hold the key to defeating the architects." Chapter 12, The Forgotten Sector. The Aurora shot through the vastness of space, following the path Lyra had chosen. As they left the familiar constellations behind, the crew could feel the weight of their journey pressing down on them. Lyra's mind was focused, her thoughts consumed by the task ahead. She knew the road would be perilous, but she was determined to see it through. Orion, however, was uneasy. He had seen the map, and he knew the dangers that lay ahead. The forgotten sector of Andromeda was a place no ship dared to venture, an ancient graveyard of worlds, a region where the stars themselves seemed to flicker and die. The architect's influence was said to linger in the darkness, and no one knew what might be waiting for them. Eva sat at her console, her fingers dancing over the controls as she monitored the ship's systems. "We're approaching the sector," she said, her voice tense. "The energy readings are off the charts. This place is unstable." Thrax, who had been silent for most of the journey, finally spoke up. "This is the place where the architects were born. They forged their first rifts here, and their power still lingers." Lyra turned to face the crew, her gaze steady. "We need to press on. The answers are here. If we can uncover them, we may have a chance at stopping the architects before they return." Orion clenched his fists. "You're asking us to walk into the heart of darkness. Are you sure this is the right path?" Lyra nodded. "It's the only one we have." As the Aurora entered the forgotten sector, the stars seemed to dim, their light barely visible against the void. The ship's sensors were overwhelmed by the strange energies that radiated from the region, and for a moment, Lyra felt a deep sense of unease settle in her chest. But she pushed it aside. There was no turning back now. The crew worked together to navigate through the dark expanse, their eyes constantly scanning the readouts, alert to any potential threats. It wasn't long before they found the first signs of something ancient, a ruined world, its surface cracked and barren, with strange, alien structures jutting out from the desolate landscape. Lyra's heart raced as she gazed at the planet on the view screen. "This is it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is where the architects began." Chapter 13, The Dark Legacy. The Aurora landed on the surface of the forgotten world, its hull vibrating with the intensity of the surrounding energy. As the crew stepped out into the alien landscape, they were struck by the eerie stillness. The sky above was a sickly shade of purple, and the ground beneath their feet was cracked, as though it had been broken open by some immense force. They moved cautiously, their steps echoing in the silence. The ruins that surrounded them were unlike anything Lyra had ever seen. Ancient structures, half buried in the sand, their surfaces covered in strange symbols and markings. Some of the symbols were familiar, like the ones Lyra had seen in the Andromedan data, but others were completely alien. "This place is older than anything we've ever encountered," Eva said, her voice filled with awe. "It's as if this civilization was trying to tap into the power of the rifts long before the Andromedans." Lyra nodded, her mind racing. "We need to find the source of their power. It's here, hidden somewhere in these ruins." As they explored deeper into the ruins, they stumbled upon something they hadn't expected. A massive structure, a temple of sorts, at the heart of the site. Its doors were sealed shut, but the energy emanating from within was palpable. The rift's influence was strongest here, and Lyra could feel it tugging at her, calling her forward. Without hesitation, she approached the temple's entrance, her fingers tracing the alien symbols etched into the stone. As she did, the doors began to creak open, revealing a vast chamber within. Inside the temple, Lyra found the heart of the architect's power, an ancient device, a machine unlike any she had ever seen. It pulsed with energy, its core glowing with a light that seemed to bend and twist, as if it were alive. "This is it," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is what they used to create the rifts." The crew gathered around the device, their expressions a mix of fear and wonder. They knew that whatever they did here, it would change everything. And so, the true journey began. Chapter 14, The Heart of the Architects. The chamber pulsed with an unnatural energy, each beat of the strange device reverberating in the air. Lyra stepped closer to the machine, feeling its pull, a magnetic force that seemed to beckon her forward, promising power, knowledge, and answers. But there was something more, something sinister hidden beneath the surface. Orion and Eva flanked her, their expressions filled with awe, but also with growing trepidation. Thrax, his gaze narrowing with suspicion, remained near the entrance, keeping watch. He had never trusted anything connected to the architects, and the air in the chamber felt thick with danger. Lyra, Orion's voice was low, filled with concern. Are you sure about this? We don't know what this machine could do. It might be the source of all the chaos we've been fighting. Lyra hesitated, her fingers hovering just inches from the surface of the device. The symbols etched into its structure seemed to shimmer, almost as if they were alive, shifting in response to her proximity. She could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on her. Could she really trust this? Could she tap into this power and not be consumed by it? But she had no other option. The architects were coming, and only by understanding their origins could they hope to defeat them. The Nexus had shown her this path, and she had to walk it. I'm doing this to protect us all, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the doubts gnawing at her insides. We need to understand what we're up against. With a deep breath, she pressed her hand against the machine's surface. The moment her skin made contact, the room was flooded with light. A shockwave of energy surged through her, and she staggered backward, nearly losing her balance. The ground beneath her feet rumbled, and the walls of the chamber groaned as if they were coming to life. This is bad, Thrax muttered, stepping forward with caution. Something's happening. The machine is reacting to you, Lyra. The light intensified, swirling into a vortex at the center of the room, pulling everything around them toward it. Lyra could feel her body growing lighter, as if she were being lifted into the air by an invisible force. What is this? She gasped, trying to steady herself. What's happening? The voice of the Guardian, distant yet unmistakable, echoed in her mind. You have activated the Nexus's heart. Be prepared. The truth will be revealed, but not without consequences. The vortex of light seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. A deep, rumbling sound filled the chamber, and for a brief moment, Lyra saw flashes of distant worlds, ancient battles, and the rise and fall of civilizations. The images were fragmented, chaotic, but they told a story of the architects, of their creations, and of their plan to reshape the universe. As the images faded, Lyra found herself standing alone in a new, unfamiliar landscape. The chamber was gone, replaced by a vast, dark expanse. The sky was an inky black, dotted with flickering stars that seemed to twist and warp as if they were reflections of something far deeper. A cold wind blew, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. She wasn't sure how she knew, but she understood that she was no longer on the same plane of existence. She had crossed over into something ancient, into the realm of the architects themselves. Welcome, a voice said from the darkness. You've come far, Lyra. Lyra spun around, her pulse quickening. The voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Tall, gaunt, with sharp, angular features and eyes that gleamed with a cold, unearthly light. It was a being like none she had ever encountered, part humanoid, part ethereal, its form shifting with every movement. Who are you? Lyra demanded, trying to steady her breath. What is this place? The figure smiled, a thin, cruel expression. I am one of the architects, a fragment of the original mind. You are standing in the heart of the rifts, the place where it all began. Lyra took a step back, her eyes scanning the surroundings, searching for an escape. The architects. You're the ones who created all of this. The rifts. The destruction. The war. Why? What do you want? The figure tilted its head, as if considering her question. We sought to bring order to the chaos of the universe, to bend reality to our will, to control it. We understood the patterns of space and time, and we knew how to manipulate them. But what we failed to realize was that power, once harnessed, cannot be controlled forever. A deep, mocking laugh escaped from the figure. And now, you're the one who stands at the crossroads. You, Lyra, have the power to choose. Will you embrace the knowledge of the architects, or will you resist it, as others have before you? Lyra's mind raced. This was what the Guardian had warned her about, the choice between creation and destruction. The Nexus was a weapon, and the architects had used it to reshape reality in their image. But at what cost? Could she trust herself with this power? Or would she too become like them, consumed by the very thing she sought to control? I won't become like you, she said, her voice firm. I won't let you twist the universe for your own gain. The figure's expression darkened, its eyes narrowing. You misunderstand, Lyra. The universe will always seek balance. The rifts are a part of that balance. You cannot stop them. You cannot stop what is inevitable. Lyra shook her head. I'll find a way. There's always another choice. The figure's form flickered, its voice growing colder. Then you are a fool. You think you can stop the architects? You think you can change the course of the universe? You are nothing but a pawn in a game far older than you realize. As it spoke, the ground beneath Lyra's feet trembled, and the sky above her seemed to ripple and distort. The fabric of reality was beginning to unravel. The figure's mocking laughter echoed in her ears as it stepped back, fading into the darkness. You will see, the voice said, its tone heavy with finality. The universe is not yours to control. It never was. Lyra clenched her fists, determination flooding her veins. The architect's words stung, but they only fueled her resolve. She wasn't done yet. There was still a chance to stop them. She could feel it in her bones. The nexus, the rift, the heart of all things, they were all connected. And if she could just unlock the secrets hidden within, she might be able to undo the damage the architects had caused. With a final glance at the fading darkness, Lyra turned and ran toward the light, her heart set on the journey ahead. Chapter 15, The Shattered Horizon. Lyra's footsteps echoed through the dark expanse, her mind racing with the knowledge the architect had imparted. The rifts, the nexus, the endless game of creation and destruction. The weight of it all pressed heavily on her, and yet she could not afford to falter. She had come too far to turn back now. The landscape before her continued to shift and warp, as though reality itself was unraveling at the edges. Stars flickered and twisted like distant flames caught in a gust of wind. The air itself was thick with a sense of urgency, a palpable tension that weighed down her every step. Somewhere out there, in the shifting chaos, the truth awaited her. She could feel the pulse of the machine beneath her skin, the nexus calling to her. It was both a gift and a curse, a power that could rewrite reality itself, yet one that would be consumed by its wielder if left unchecked. She had to find a way to control it, to master it before it mastered her. As Lyra walked through the shimmering void, a sudden crackling sound pierced the silence. A ripple ran through the air, and before her stood another figure, a familiar face, though much changed since the last time they met. "You're not supposed to be here," Thrax's voice boomed as he emerged from the darkness, his eyes filled with equal parts concern and disbelief. This is where the architect's power was born. You're walking into their domain, Lyra. It's dangerous." Lyra stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. "I have to. This is the only way to stop them. To understand how they use the Nexus. I have to know more, Thrax." Thrax's expression softened, his normally stoic demeanor faltering. "I understand why you want answers. But this is beyond anything we've faced. You're tampering with forces you can't control." "I know the risks," she said, her voice steady, though inside she could feel a storm brewing. "But if we don't act now, everything we've fought for will be lost. We need to understand the Nexus before they return. I don't have any other choice." Thrax stood silently for a moment, his gaze lingering on her as if weighing her words. Finally, he nodded, a reluctant acceptance in his eyes. "Then I'm with you. But we must move quickly. The rifts, they're expanding. Every second we waste here is another second they use to spread their chaos." Lyra looked around, her gaze shifting to the distant horizon. The landscape was shifting again, the stars pulling apart, and strange, geometric shapes emerged from the folds of space. These were the relics of the architects, their structures, their creations, each one a testament to their desire for domination. But what had they created? What were they hiding? As they ventured deeper into the realm, the air began to hum with an unnatural resonance. The closer they drew to the heart of the Nexus, the more Lyra could feel the overwhelming force of its power, its potential to alter everything she knew, everything she had fought for. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them trembled violently, and a crack tore open the fabric of the sky itself. A figure emerged from the rift, its presence like a black hole pulling at everything around it. It was an embodiment of darkness, a being made entirely of shifting shadows, with eyes that glowed like the death of stars. "You dare walk where we once ruled," the figure's voice rumbled, an ominous, deep tone that resonated through the air. "You think you can undo what has been set in motion? You are nothing, insignificant in the face of the architect's will." Lyra's heart skipped a beat, but she held her ground, meeting the figure's gaze with unwavering resolve. "You're wrong. I'm here to stop you. To stop the architects from rewriting the universe for their own gain." The figure laughed, a hollow sound that sent a chill down her spine. "You don't understand, do you? The architects are eternal. The Nexus is their legacy. It was never meant to be stopped, only used. And now, you are its keeper. With a flick of the figure's hand, the surroundings shifted again. The darkness grew deeper, and the stars blinked out one by one, swallowed by the growing void. A pulse of energy rushed toward Lyra, crashing into her like a tidal wave. She staggered backward, barely able to hold her ground. The force was overwhelming, and for a moment, she thought she might lose herself to it. But then she remembered the words of the Guardian. The Nexus is a weapon, yes, but it is also a choice. You must choose. Closing her eyes, Lyra focused. She reached deep within herself, finding the core of the energy that flowed through her. The Nexus was calling to her, its power swirling just beyond her reach. But she had learned something important in her journey. Power, in its purest form, was only as strong as the will that controlled it. With a deep breath, she reached out, grasping the raw energy and pulling it toward her, bending it to her will. The swirling chaos began to stabilize, the energy slowly shifting, taking shape under her command. "No!" the figure screamed, its voice cracking like thunder. "You cannot control it. You are nothing compared to the architects." Lyra opened her eyes, locking her gaze with the figure. "I am something different. I am not bound by the same rules as you. And I will stop you." With a final surge of power, the energy in the Nexus collapsed, the swirling vortex shrinking into a pinpoint of light. The figure screamed in rage as it was consumed by the light, its form dissolving into nothingness. For a moment, everything was still. The stars flickered back to life, and the oppressive weight of darkness lifted. Lyra stood alone, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she tried to steady herself. She had done it. She had stopped the architect, but she knew this was only the beginning. Thrax approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the empty space. "What happened? Where did it go?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. She was still processing everything, the power she had just wielded, the force she had just faced. It was only a taste of what the architects were capable of, and she knew that they were far from done. "The Nexus," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's not just a weapon. It's a choice. The architects used it to create the rifts, to bend the universe to their will. But I can use it differently. I can reshape it, reshape reality." Thrax's eyes widened. "Are you saying you control the rifts now? That you can stop them?" Lyra nodded slowly. "I think I can, but it won't be easy. The Nexus is a power that can reshape everything. I'll need to find a way to control it, to harness it without letting it consume me." "And what about the architects?" Thrax asked, his tone cautious. "You just fought one of them. They won't give up. They won't stop until they have what they want." Lyra's expression hardened. "Then we'll stop them first. We have the power now. But we need to learn more. We need to find their weak points, find their plans. The architects won't win this time." Chapter 16, The Fractured Alliance. Back aboard the Aurora, the crew gathered around the central command deck, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and determination. They had come so far, faced unimaginable threats, and yet the true battle had only just begun. "We've learned a lot in the last few hours," Lyra said, standing at the front of the room, her voice steady despite the weight of the revelations. "But we've also awakened something. The architects won't rest until they've reclaimed control of the Nexus. We need to act quickly." Orion nodded. "We've seen what they can do. They can manipulate reality itself. They have an army of rift creatures at their disposal. But we've got something they don't." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "We've got each other," Orion said, glancing at the crew. "We've fought together, and we've learned how to survive. We may not have all the answers yet, but we're in this together." Thrax's voice rumbled from the back of the room. "Don't forget what we're up against. The architects are relentless. We'll need every resource, every ally we can find. They'll stop at nothing." Lyra turned toward the viewport, her gaze focused on the stars. The galaxy stretched out before them, vast and full of potential, yet it was also full of danger. The architects were out there, somewhere, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim their power. But Lyra was ready. She had faced the darkness. And now she would bring the light. Chapter 17, The Shattered Path. The crew of the Aurora had barely recovered from their encounter with the architect when Lyra began to strategize. The Nexus, the power it contained, and the architect's unrelenting pursuit of control weighed heavily on her mind. She could feel the machine's call still pulsing in the back of her mind, like a heartbeat that never quite stopped. But there was no time to linger. The galaxy was changing, and with it, so was their mission. "What's our next move?" Eva asked, her voice filled with both determination and fatigue as she sat across from Lyra at the ship's command table. Her once confident demeanor had dimmed, but Lyra could see the flicker of the old fire beneath it. The team had been through so much, and yet it felt like they were standing on the edge of something far greater. "We need more information," Lyra replied, her eyes scanning the star charts on the table. The Nexus had connected her to a vast network of data, fragments of knowledge from across the galaxy. It was as if she could see the threads of the Architect's influence stretching through space like a spider's web, reaching into every corner of the known universe. She needed to unravel it, find the source of their power, and end this war before it consumed them all. "We'll need to track the rifts. The more we know about their patterns, the better we can predict where they'll strike next," Thrax chimed in from his position at the control panel. His gaze was focused, unwavering, as always. But even he couldn't mask the growing tension in his voice. "And I don't need to remind you that the rift creatures are only one part of the equation. The architects themselves will be gunning for us." Lyra nodded grimly. The rift creatures were monstrous, a byproduct of the architects meddling with the fabric of space and time. But what really terrified her were the architects themselves. If what she had experienced in the Nexus was any indication, they were far more powerful than she could have ever imagined. They were not just gods in their realm. They had shaped the very building blocks of reality. "We're not going to defeat them by just hiding and running," Lyra said, standing up and pacing the room. "We need to find their central hub. If we can locate where they draw their power from, we can take it from them. We'll cut off the source and break their hold on the rifts." Orion, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "You're right, but how do we even begin? We've got nothing but a few fragmented visions and vague knowledge of the Nexus. We're talking about a race that's centuries ahead of us." Lyra turned to him, her gaze sharp. "We don't have centuries, Orion. We have right now. And we have something they don't. The Nexus is linked to me now. I can feel its power, its web. If we can find a way to harness it, fully, then we might just stand a chance." Thrax's eyes narrowed. "You've been tapping into it, haven't you? The Nexus. It's not something you can control easily, Lyra. You've already seen what happens when you try to use it. You're lucky you're still standing." "I know my limits," Lyra replied, her voice steady but carrying an edge of frustration. "I can't control the Nexus entirely, not yet. But I can feel its pull. And if we find the right coordinates, the Nexus can guide us to the heart of the Architect's network." Eva leaned in, her interest piqued. "Are you saying we need to follow the rifts? Use them as a map of sorts?" Lyra nodded. "Exactly. The rifts are more than just portals. They're the Architect's way of bending reality. If we can use them to trace the source, we might be able to get to their hub before they realize we're coming." Orion stood up and crossed the room to the viewport, staring out into the vast expanse of space. "And what happens when we get there? How do we stop them?" Lyra paused for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. "We destroy the Nexus. If we break it, the Architects will lose their grip on the rifts. Without it, they'll be vulnerable." "Destroy the Nexus?" Thrax echoed, his disbelief evident. "Are you serious? That could tear apart the entire galaxy." "It's the only way," Lyra said, her tone unwavering. "If we can't control it, then we must destroy it. We can't let them continue to rewrite reality at their whim. I've already seen how dangerous they are. If we don't stop them, they'll consume everything." The silence in the room was thick, the weight of Lyra's words hanging heavy in the air. The decision had been made. They would confront the Architects, even if it meant risking everything. Chapter 18, The First Rift. With their plan set in motion, the crew of the Aurora prepared for their journey into the heart of the Architect's domain. They knew the risks all too well, but there was no turning back. Lyra's connection to the Nexus had grown stronger, and the strange whispers that had once been distant were now clearer, though still cryptic. The rifts were calling, and Lyra could feel their pull with every passing moment. Their first destination was a remote system on the edge of known space, a place where a rift had recently torn open. The Nexus had indicated that this was no ordinary rift, but rather a nexus point, a convergence of several pathways, all leading toward the Architect's core. As the Aurora approached the system, the crew gathered in the briefing room. Lyra stood before them, a map of the galaxy spread out on the table, showing the location of the rifts they needed to investigate. The stars twinkled coldly outside the ship's windows, but the distance between them and the rift felt like an eternity. "This is it," Lyra said, pointing to a small, uncharted system. "We're heading to the heart of the first rift. We'll need to approach cautiously." The The closer we get, the more unstable the fabric of space will become. The architects will be watching. We can't afford any mistakes. Thrax crossed his arms. The last time we were this close to a rift, everything nearly fell apart. You're asking for a miracle, Lyra. I don't believe in miracles, Lyra replied, her voice firm. I believe in making our own fate. We can't wait any longer. If we're going to stop the architects, we need to act now. With a shared glance, the crew nodded in agreement. They were all in this together, and though fear loomed over them, so did a sense of determination. This was their chance to stop the architects and end the threat of the rifts once and for all. Chapter 19, The Edge of the Void. As the Aurora entered the system, the atmosphere in the ship grew tense. The rift was visible now, a swirling vortex in the void, distorting space and time around it. It was far larger than anything they had encountered before, and as they drew closer, the ship began to shake with the immense gravitational forces pulling them in. Lyra stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the rift as it grew larger on the viewport. Prepare for entry, she ordered, her voice steady despite the gnawing anxiety creeping into her chest. Eva began calibrating the ship's systems. We're not sure how this will affect our shields, but we've got no choice. We need to get as close to the rift's core as we can without being pulled into the distortion. Thrax entered the cockpit, his face grim. We're either going to make it or we're not. No turning back now. With a deep breath, Lyra gave the signal. The Aurora angled toward the rift, its engines roaring as it cut through the void. As they crossed the event horizon, the ship shuddered, and the stars outside the windows began to stretch and distort, as though the fabric of reality itself was being bent around them. Lyra's mind raced as she felt the pull of the Nexus growing stronger, the lines between space and time blurring around her. She could feel the architect's presence, their eyes upon her. The rift was not just a doorway, it was a trap, a test. And Lyra was about to face it head-on.